Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me take a quick moment and just say, first off, thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Matt Leary, and I'm a data scientist at Markel Corporation here in Richmond, Virginia. And before we get started, I did want to take a brief moment and kind of talk about the speaker series. For those of you who may not know, the VCU Decision Analytics Program, it's a weekend program designed for working professionals who want to develop or enhance their analytics career. I graduated the program in 2018, and for the past 2 years, I've been part of an alumni meetup group that meets about once a month and shares new techniques, new software, new skills that we're learning, and bring it back so all the alumni members can have an opportunity to learn a little bit more. This was an in-person meetup, and then obviously with the outbreak of COVID, in-person meetups were no longer possible, and we moved to a virtual format. And with that, we saw an opportunity to do something a little bit different and potentially have a speaker series like this. We reached out to the staff at VCU Decision Analytics Program, talked to them about it, and this idea really came to shape. So very quickly, I'd like to thank Steve Custer, Paul Brooks, Brittany Graysick, and Gabby Oliveira for all their help. This 100% would not have happened without them. We also partnered with the Richmond Tidewater chapter of the Institute for Operation, Research, and Management Studies, known as Informs, and they helped us on the back end and also promoting this. So I'd like to quickly give them a plug and say, if you're interested in joining the local chapter, it's $15, and you can join by visiting informs.org. So what can you expect from this series? This is the first of 4 series, and future talks will look at modeling COVID, how this will impact data professionals. We'll also take a look at how a local state agency marshaled together a lot of data to help make decisions during this time. Each session will be hosted by an alumni from the Decision Analytics Program who will kick it off and help moderate questions. For today's event, and here just a second, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Steve Custer, who is the director of the program. He's going to introduce our speaker, Greg Bucko. You might have noticed when you entered, your mics are on mute, but if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see the Zoom's Q&A tool. If you have a question, please enter it in there. And then myself and some other people, after Greg's done, we'll help moderate those and pass them along to Greg, and we'll have a little Q&A session at the end. We did want to make sure we respect everyone's time, so we will be planning to wrap up a few minutes before 1 p.m. Eastern time, knowing that everyone has probably to get back to work or has something else that they need to get to. So again, just thank you all very much for attending this today and future sessions. And with that, I will pass it on to Steve.
Let's see, I'm muted. Okay. Thank you, Matt. When Matt and Jason and Bayan and others of the alumni were working on this program, I made one request, that I get to introduce Greg. Greg was a member of our very first class, started in 2014, finished in 2016. And with all due respect to subsequent classes, that was a very special class. We were one of the first programs in the country, and we were floundering, not quite sure what we were doing. We were learning as we went through. And from that class, we got lots of feedback, suggestions. They made suggestions. We discussed their ideas with them. It was very much a partnership, more so than a traditional faculty-student relationship. I think they realized they were not only making suggestions to improve their program, but to build a strong program for students yet to come. And they did do that. This is the second time I've had a chance to introduce Greg. For that class, at the graduation, we had our own graduation ceremony, a couple hundred friends and family, and the students selected their own fellow student to give an address at that graduation, and they selected Greg. So this is the second time I've gotten to introduce Greg. So doing that, Greg is currently Vice President, Data and Analytics at Marriott Vacations Worldwide in Orlando, Florida. There, he's leading Marriott's drive to become the most digitally enabled, insight-driven player in the vacation industry. Been there about 2 years, I think, Greg. Previously, he was Director of Marketing Analytics and Customer Insight at Vastana Signature Experiences, also in Orlando. There, he and his team supported marketing, direct marketing, digital marketing, overall strategies for Sheraton, Westin, and the Hyatt brands. Earlier, here in Richmond, he held analytic and customer insight positions at Southern States Cooperative and Genworth Financial. As I mentioned, he has a Master's of Decision Analytics from here, VCU, and he also has a Bachelor's in Business Administration from Queen's University in Charlotte. So with that, Greg, welcome back, and thanks for kicking off our series on this very timely topic. Go to it, Greg.
Thank you very much.
Greg.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Custer. I really appreciate that introduction, and I'd like to thank VCU for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today, and I want to thank all of you who took time out of your day to tune into this. Welcome to my office here in sunny Orlando, Florida. I've done a lot of presentations in my career. I've been very fortunate there, but this is uncharted territory for me, doing a Zoom presentation. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is forego the PowerPoint for today and just tell a story of what our data and analytics team was able to achieve in the midst of this crisis so far. I'll describe sort of who we are and what we were focused on before the world had ever heard of COVID-19. I'll talk about how the vision and the strategy that we've been working on for the last several years ended up shaping the kind of team that we ultimately became in the midst of this pandemic. It's a story that's really meant for those of you who lead data-oriented teams today, or who desire to lead one someday. Ultimately, it's a story of how having the right vision and the strategy for your analytics team can set you up for success in any challenge. Now, I'm not going to talk any more about my bio. Dr. Custer did a great job there, and you can certainly check me out on LinkedIn, and I hope you do. Except to say that, yes, I've been working in data for my entire career and have been leading data and analytics teams for the last decade. And I truly believe that all of the false starts and missed opportunities and mistakes that I've made in the past have prepared me for this particular challenge. I'd also like to re-highlight the fact that I was in that inaugural cohort of VCU's Decision Analytics Master's Program. And I'm very proud of that fact. And a lot of what I learned in those 2 intense years continue to serve me as a leader. Now, throughout the story, I'll highlight those choices that we made along the way over the last few years with this team that helped prepare our team for this current crisis. And there's 5 things that I consider to be the key ingredients in building a high-functioning analytics team, regardless of what industry you work in. Now, we didn't know, of course, that we were barreling towards this moment in history, and we certainly don't relish the situation that we're in right now. But upon reflection, I recognize that these 5 ingredients could help other analytic leaders develop their teams for success in the face of difficult circumstances. Now, the story begins in 2016 when I moved from Richmond to accept a role leading an analytics team for a company that Dr. Custer mentioned, Vistana Signature Experiences, a resort developer based here in Orlando, who operated the Sheraton and the Westin and the Hyatt Vacation Club brands, but that's not important. What is important is that I inherited a team at the time that had hit rock bottom in terms of morale. My predecessor had spent just a few months with the company, enough to establish the team that I inherited, and then they left for another opportunity. The leader who took over in the interim and would be my boss upon joining, their style didn't work well with data geeks like ourselves. In fact, during my interview process, I actually had a caller who called and told me about the reality of what was going on, their leader, and how low the morale was. And in an effort to, provide full transparency before I made my decision to join, which I really appreciated. Being the glutton for punishment that I am, I decided I would take on the role anyway. And once I accepted the role, it was very clear that the anonymous caller was not exaggerating. In fact, if anything, they had sort of underreported what was going on. In my first 90 days, I observed and I got to know this team and sought to understand what was really going on. And despite all of the personnel hardships this team had faced, I came to the conclusion that the number one issue this team was facing was an identity crisis. No one on the team could articulate beyond talking about projects and tactics what the team stood for, what difference they made to the organization, or what impact they were having. Worse yet, no one outside the team could either. I realized quickly that this team didn't have a skills problem or a budget problem or a technology problem. Any issues that we had with those things could be addressed later. This team had a brand problem, because I believe that the sort of first ingredient when building a high performance analytics team is to establish your brand. Now, and this can be an abstract concept to a lot of quantitative leaders out there, and I get it. And that's why a lot of analytics teams fail to reach their full potential. For some of us, the touchy-feely stuff is really hard. We want to focus on the science and the data and the analysis and the algorithms, and that's fantastic. But we can't complain later then that our findings are falling on deaf ears, or that no one is listening to us, or that no one is taking our work seriously. I always say, if you don't take the time to build your brand in the organization, your labor will be in vain. Because an insight without an audience is like sort of like a Ferrari without an engine. It looks great, but it's not going anywhere. So what do I mean by building your brand as a data and analytics team? First of all, it's about establishing your team's identity. For example, we realized early on that we were not the only data and analytics team in the company. There were these small pockets of people in almost every department that used those words in their title. But after a few conversations with these people, it quickly became clear that these teams were focused on building reports to serve their departments. Most of the analytics teams were set up by VPs who wanted more control over their reporting, basically shadow IT teams. So armed with this understanding, we were able to kind of create some space between ourselves and those teams and define our identity as the team who very deliberately does not build reports, but instead uses the data to find insights to support better business decisions. We also realized that any data science that was happening in our company was being done by third-party consultants. I made the case that we needed to have a small data science function that was internal, not to replace anyone, but to be the team that does the sort of proofs of concept and cutting edge stuff and the kind of skunkworks R&D for data science, but also the team that could help keep these third parties honest, because we could speak their language. We could help by asking the tough questions and making sure that we were getting our money's worth as an organization. Because we all know that there's a lot of data science snake oil in this world, and we didn't want our company to fall victim to that. So what were the benefits of establishing this sort of clear brand identity in the organization? Three things. One, we were now in control of our own destiny. Rather than waiting for leaders to start throwing random requests at us, we could now look at everything through the lens of delivering insights and providing data science services, simple as that. We could now build a strategy around this identity, this vision. I could hire for it, I could budget for it, I could plan for it, and I could begin to justify our existence as a team. The three people understood who we were and how we were different from the data geeks in their department. And more importantly, those data geeks no longer saw us as a threat, which sort of brings me to the next ingredient, which is prioritize developing relationships built on trust. It's not that leaders in the organization didn't trust us. It's that they didn't know us or understand us enough to establish that trust. And that's why having a concise brand identity that I could articulate when I walked into people's offices was critical. Because it's not like they had any evidence early on that we were any good at doing analysis or building models. Remember, this was a brand new team. But having a clearly defined vision for where we were going bought us just a little extra time. And those early meetings with executives bought us just enough trust to give us a shot. So now we had this clear identity and we had a little bit of brand equity to spend. And now it was time to start getting down to business. But before we could really get serious about building models or calculating lifetime value or creating segmentation solutions, we had to develop a clear strategy, which is sort of the third ingredient. Make sure your analytics team is operating with a strategy in place. Because doing analytics without a strategy is just establishing that strategy meant answering a few questions. Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right processes in place? Do we have the right people? I won't bore you with all the details, but I'll say we realized quickly that we had a wide variety of skills on the team. We had traditional analysts, we had data engineers, we had data visualization skills, and I was able to hire that first internal data scientist in the company's history. So we had the pieces. As for the resources, well, that was interesting. We had actually been given a pretty substantial budget. But it turns out that this budget was there to cover a ton of third-party contracts and legacy technologies. In fact, I was able to go to the senior executives and say, hey, I don't need all of this money. And once they picked themselves off the floor, because they had never heard those words used together in a sentence, I explained that we could replace the legacy technology with lower cost and even open source software. And as for having third-party contracts and consultants on an annual retainer, well, I've got this multidisciplinary analytics team that's going to make at least some of those contracts obsolete. So yeah, I'd like to give some of this money back. And once they realized that I wasn't joking, it gave us another boost of trust and brand equity and bought us just a little bit more time to start showing meaningful results. Now, as for the question of whether we had the right processes in place, the answer to that was pretty simple. No, we didn't. But it was as clear as day is that if we were going to live up to the brand image that we wanted for ourselves, we would need to adopt agile practices into our analytics workflow. Now, most people have heard agile applied to IT project management, but I'm convinced that it's just as powerful for analytics teams, even if it means just adopting the general philosophies of agile. We made it clear to our internal clients that we were not just going to take questions and requests and go away for weeks and come back with a PowerPoint presentation and some big aha moment. That we were going to be fully transparent and highly collaborative, and we were going to keep them involved in the entire analysis process, start to finish. And this was pretty refreshing for people who were sort of used to funding expensive projects and with research vendors. We began bringing bite-sized results to people every few days. And by doing that, we stayed focused on understanding what was important to the business, not just what we thought was important. And it was in the agile analytics process that we really began to gain our reputation. Our work began to speak for us rather than Greg speaking theoretically about some future state in which analytics would be able to deliver value to the organization. And people on the team began receiving the kinds of positive feedback that we all need to keep us fueled and motivated. And slowly and steadily, over time, the members of the team began to trust me and began to trust each other. And suddenly we went from the doldrums of morale to the kind of unity and camaraderie that every leader wants for their team. We had purpose, we had confidence, we had a real sense of pride in the work that we were producing. And we would need every ounce of that trust and that confidence and that pride on an April morning in 2018, when we received word that we had just been acquired by Marriott Vacations Worldwide, a company that was significantly larger and significantly more intimidating than we were. Now, if you've ever worked for a company that's been acquired by a larger firm, you know how thick that fog of uncertainty can be. Suddenly you're visiting strange offices and meeting strange people that you don't really want to meet. you feel as though you're under a microscope all the time, that every meeting or conversation with the acquiring company is really just a job interview. It can be mentally and emotionally draining. And if you've ever tried to lead a team while being acquired, you know that the stress is heightened by a sense of responsibility, right? To keep people calm and focused and ultimately employed. However, the process that we had gone through to at least begin becoming the kind of high-performing team that we wanted to be gave us some advantage. First of all, we had that clear identity that we could describe easily and that we were well practiced in describing. And that was good because, we needed to tell our story all over again to a whole new cast of characters. And secondly, we had a body of work built up in just 18 months that could act as a portfolio for what we were capable of. But most importantly, we had built enough brand equity and to develop such a strong network of advocates and fans in the legacy organization that our new bosses had to take notice. And so it was because of this that we were able to at least survive the transition to this new company intact. In fact, we even were able to expand our reach to more departments and more corners of the business. And we ended up acquiring new responsibilities, including digital analytics and voice of the customer responsibilities. Which brings me to the final critical ingredient that prepared us for our current reality. We became a diverse, multi-dimensional analytics team. What do I mean when I say multi-dimensional? Well, we weren't just a data science team, or just a business intelligence team, or just a customer insights team, or just a digital analytics team. We touched all of those disciplines, which was a bit of a reflection of both my own journeyman background, as well as our philosophy of hiring for breadth rather than just depth. That meant hiring both individuals who have a strong quantitative background, but also bringing in individuals who may not have the traditional computer science and statistics backgrounds, but instead may have experience in marketing or pricing or finance or customer service, and leveraging training programs through a variety of sources. It means hiring creative thinkers with a penchant for numbers. It meant hiring more communicators and more collaborators. Now, we still had, people that fit the traditional profile of that solitary, introverted analyst or data scientist. But now we had this crop of sort of non-traditional thinkers who could help engage with our internal clients in brand new ways and also understood our complex industry. And so for the first year and a half, our team and the rest of this newly formed organization went through a wrenching transition. We experienced what could only be described as a culture shock. And we quickly realized that we had some real barriers to success that we needed to overcome. Our access to the volume of data that we needed was limited. The data in this new organization was highly fragmented. The layers of bureaucracy involved in doing really anything was sort of antithetical to our Agile philosophy. We had to learn how to navigate and cut through the red tape, which really became our biggest time and energy vacuum. People on my team who should have been spending their time analyzing were spending their time completing forms or meeting with lawyers or begging for signatures. It was a reality that we had to accept in this new organization, that it was going to be much more rigid and controlled than our previous company had ever been. And it certainly didn't help that Marriott International experienced a massive and well-publicized data security breach during this time. And although we are a separate company independent of Marriott Hotels, we were still their number one licensee of that brand name, right? And so when Marriott sneezes, we have to cover our mouths. And all of this, along with headwinds like GDPR and CCPA and other privacy regulations, they sort of conspired to blunt the impact that we wanted to have right out of the gate. But we did what we knew from our past experience worked. We set to work reestablishing our identity, redeveloping our brand, rebuilding our network of relationships, and sort of reimagining our strategy in this new organization. And we broke through at least a few barriers, and we could see success just on the horizon. Our strategy for 2020 was, it was well-defined, it was lucid, it was achievable. We had the right people, we had the right skills, our optimism was returning to its former peak. And then came Friday the 13th, March 2020. And that was the day that we realized that this once distant and abstract threat was in fact very real and very much here to stay, and that it was going to impact our industry in immeasurable ways. Now, when you live in Orlando and you work in the hospitality industry, even if you don't work for Disney, they still have a major influence on you. So if Disney is a whole other planet, then the rest of us just are moons that revolve around it. So on that day, when on the 13th of March, we knew that things had just gotten real when Disney decided to close their parks indefinitely. And we realized quickly, though, that as a data and analytics team that was supposedly focused on delivering insights, that we could serve a unique role in this crisis. We realized early on that in the face of this profound uncertainty, people would be starving for answers. And we knew that it was our responsibility to help deliver those answers. So rather than retreat, we coalesced around this concept that it wasn't just our job anymore to provide insights. It was like our civic duty to serve our colleagues and our friends with clear and concise information. And we also realized that this would be a defining moment for our team, and that if we didn't embrace it fully, we would regret it for a very long time. Now, let's take a moment to just reflect on the 5 key ingredients that I've described throughout the story. The 5 things I believe prepared us for this moment. 1, building a brand identity. Now, it took longer than it did with our previous organization to do this, but we were unwavering in our message. We provide insights and advanced analytics services, period. And I had spent months touring this global company and reiterating this to as many people who would listen, so that by the time 2020 rolled around, people knew who we were and what we had to offer. 2, building trusting relationships, again, in order to get the kind of resources that we needed to be successful. It's not just the forms that you fill out, it's the people you know and the relationships that you can leverage. And along with articulating our brand identity, I also worked hard at cultivating relationships with people that could help us secure the most precious raw material for our team, which of course is data. We also made sure that we could demonstrate how our team could complement other data teams, which again helped us be seen as less threatening and more valuable. 3, we had that strategy in place. And although we had to throw that strategy right out the window when the pandemic hit, we at least knew how to implement one, which was going to be critical as we went right back to the proverbial drawing board. 4, we practiced Agile analytics, or at least the philosophies of Agile. And sure, I'll be the first to admit that our project management techniques can be a little loosey-goosey, and perhaps our documentation is about as thin as a Triscuit, but what we lack in PM skills, we more than make up for in our ability to be flexible and adaptable and fast. And I find those things to be far more important for an analytics team. 5, lastly, this concept of building a creative, multidiscipline team was perhaps the thing that positioned us for success more than anything else, because we knew that we would have to rely on all of our various skills and backgrounds in order to squeeze the most insights out of the data that we had available. So armed with those 5 key ingredients and having only sort of recently gone through the traumatic experience of surviving an acquisition, we set off to tackle this new challenge. Our identity was clear, but we needed it to be more specific. We were going to be the team that provided insights into the impact of this disease on our customers and ultimately our business. And we quickly formulated a brand new strategy. We were going to create new first-party data sources in the form of primary market research. We were going to combine that primary data with plenty of secondary sources. And we were going to help people think about models in a responsible way. That meant helping the organization think about the various models and forecasts being bandied about in the media. And our agile mindset allowed us to sort of chase down a variety of perspectives and data sets. Everything from social media comments to COVID disease trends to digital behavior to macroeconomic measures to reservation and cancellation patterns. First-party data, third-party data, internal data, external data, all of it was fair game in this pursuit of insights. And like a lot of people did, we leveraged the best available COVID disease data and built a dashboard that showed new COVID cases and death rates and testing. But we layered on top of that data from Kaiser Family Foundation that tracked the response of each state and how strict their quarantines and travel advisories were. And then we layered on top of that a view of where our customers lived, which properties they typically traveled to, how many already canceled, but also how many were searching for availability even during this time. We layered on top of that a tracking study that followed our customers and their confidence in being able to travel in the near future. And that gave us some leading indicators in this uncertain time. Then we added text analytics to social media comments, and we explored digital patterns, including what words people were searching for on our website. Even competitive intelligence we brought to the table, which is something that we had never done before. And then we finally did something that I've always wanted to do. We established an internal blog called Weekly Insights that packaged up key findings from the week and reported them out using real full sentences and paragraphs, not bullet points or PowerPoints. This internal blog became the vehicle that established us as the go-to experts across the organization. And it also served as a way to keep us focused. We had very publicly declared that we were going to deliver insights every Friday, and there would be no going back. And as scary as that commitment seemed at the time, it was absolutely the right thing to do. Now, our insights have helped shape some critical decisions around things like our refund policy and the enforcement of our safety protocols in our properties. We've been able to demonstrate the pent-up demand of our customers, how people were engaging differently with our digital tools and our websites, how we should most effectively communicate to them, and ultimately how the disease itself is impacting our customers' propensity to travel and to purchase travel. It's not hyperbole to say that these 4.5 months have been the most challenging and yet rewarding time of my career, and we are very much in the thick of it right now. Our team was not immune to the hardships of this global situation. We work, obviously, in an industry that was particularly hard hit. Even though we had established ourselves as sort of a critical resource, we too had to furlough team members. We had to let go of people, and we had to cut the hours of those remaining. I personally have taken a pay cut, but in the face of millions of unemployed Americans and over 140,000 people who have died from this disease in this country alone, you won't hear me complain. In fact, because of the resource strain that we're under, I've had the pleasure actually of getting to jump headfirst into data again. I get to visualize and analyze and model and do all the things that made me fall in love with this discipline in the first place. In fact, it feels a little bit like I'm back at VCU with my old cohort. And I realized that one day this too shall pass. Right? COVID-19 will be relegated to the pages of history. But what our team has achieved in this short period of time, and those 5 key ingredients that I believe made it possible, will position us for success in whatever the post-COVID world looks like. So again, I would like to just thank the faculty at VCU for inviting me to speak with you today. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. And it's certainly been a pleasure to reflect on a period in my career that I'm fiercely proud of. And I hope that our story resonated with at least some of you in some small way. Or at the very least, I hope that my story conveyed my deeply held conviction that data and analytics is no longer just about math or statistics or writing Python code. It's about people. It's about helping people make better decisions, decisions that can ultimately save lives and livelihoods. And in this most tumultuous time, when data is being twisted and warped to serve various agendas, it's the responsibility of those of us on the front lines of analytics to deliver the most valuable output that we can, which is truth. So again, thank you, and I would be delighted to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Greg. We do have some questions. I'll read them to you, and I'll just say quickly, you mentioned you had a plan for 2020, and that went out the window. I think we all agree with you personally and professionally on that one. We did have a question early on that I wanted to ask you when you talked about the collaboration between data science team and IT groups that you, how has that worked out? Has there been a push to collaborate with IT teams more, to integrate more, or potentially take those tool sets to other aspects of the organization?
Yeah, and that's really where trust comes in, right? Because we were able to essentially establish, and we're still working on it, we're still unlocking access to data sets, but we were essentially able to kind of create the kind of access that IT has, so that we can do analysis the way that we do it. And that is absolutely critical, and it's sort of my number one priority coming into this new organization, or really any organization, is to make sure that we have the access to data that we need. And that requires partnership with IT. So yeah, it's certainly gotten better. We've got more work to do.
Great. I'm going to group these questions together. There's 2 that relate to Agile. You mentioned your shop being Agile-esque, or, embracing some of that. So the first question, how do you maintain an annual strategy with an Agile methodology? And does scope creep become a hindrance to fulfilling your annual strategy then when you're planning an Agile cycle?
That is a great question. And so I appreciate who sent that in. The strategy is about staying broad enough to allow for Agile to really work. And so, we break our strategy up into no more than 3 or 4 major segments. And so for 2020, it was going to be about return on investment. It was going to be about our owner insights. It was going to be about marketing optimization. And those 3 things, we at least could tell a story about what we were focused on. And projects could fit into one of those 3 things. But it also, by defining those 3 segments of our strategy, we were able to say no to things that might take us down a rabbit hole, right? Or that might cause scope creep and take resources away from other valuable things that we're doing. So Agile within the structure of our strategy.
Great, and that leads great into the next question regarding Agile. You kind of hit on it, but what aspects of Agile have you found most helpful as an analytics team, and what aspects have you just abandoned or ignored because it didn't fit what you were trying to work and trying to achieve?
Yeah, so the philosophy of Agile is what is most valuable to us. This concept of constant iteration, constantly checking in, the stand-up meeting, rather than going off waterfalling to a final deliverable on some distant date in the months ahead with an aha moment. You know, that I did that a lot in my career and realized that just causes a lot of issues in terms of, hey, when that aha moment comes, the world's already passed you by, or the problem has changed, or you weren't looking at it the right way. And so that, you know, that's just wasted energy and time. So for Agile, and the Agile philosophy gave us the ability to stay focused and stay on track. Now, some of the formalities around Agile and project management, that's something we probably could do a lot better with. And that's probably just my own personal style, not being too fenced in with project management. But, you know, I have hired people who are a lot more disciplined than I am, because they create that counterbalance and can keep the team on track from a PM standpoint.
Great, thank you. You mentioned during your talk about the 5 things in the recipe that helped you react to handling the pandemic. We've got 2 questions asking you to go over those 5 issues again, if you could share that.
Sure. So the first is build your brand, which means understand who you are and what role you serve in the organization. Don't be generic, right? Define yourself so that you can articulate to leaders throughout the organization who you are and what you stand for and what value you add. That's important for, you know, giving people an understanding of who you are, but also protecting yourself in these difficult situations. The second is to have a strategy, a plan, and focus. We talked about that. Third is to have a process in place like Agile, and how critical Agile is, I think, to developing yourself as a team that can deliver things quickly and things that are focused on the organization itself. And then ultimately have that dynamic, multi-dimensional team, and how important that is to have people that aren't just data scientists, right? Or aren't just focused on the quantitative, but also can tell the story of the analytics that you're providing, and those people that understand the industry and can find the insights that you need. So yeah, that's, I think that covered them all.
Thank you. We have 2 that kind of have to deal with more qualitative data. So I'll read both questions to you so you can kind of group them together. But somebody had a question: what insights did you find through text analytics and social media? And then also somebody asked, you know, whenever I speak to data experts, the presumption is that data is always quantitative. Do you see any space in large organizations for qualitative data analysis? This data could come in the form of social media posts, as you mentioned, but also long form employee feedback or performance reviews, to name some other things.
Absolutely. I mean, data is data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And we now have tools available to us as analysts and data scientists that take qualitative data and turn it into something quantitative. And that has been very, very valuable to us. So what did we find in things like comments on social media, which was really kind of a first for me. I had never really delved into social media. It was always sort of something that seemed interesting, but over there. And then it became really, really critical in these early weeks of the pandemic. You know, our first major learning was just our customers' visceral response to our refund policy right out of the gate. And so their voice actually influenced our review of this refund policy and the changes to it that became more customer centric. And that just showed me the power of customers' voice and the power of listening to all the channels that data comes through, including the non-traditional channels like social media or blogs, or news feeds or whatever. You just have to have your ear to the ground and capture as many signals as you can, especially in this kind of situation, because you never know where the answer is going to come from or where the insight is going to come from.
Great, thanks. And that's kind of looking externally at how people feel, but there's a question you spoke about having to furlough on your team and make some hard decisions as a manager. So the question is, with so much external pressure on your industry affecting overall morale, what steps are you taking to maintain your team's morale and focus?
This is a great question, and it is a challenge. And I think what I talked about at the end of my story, which is coalescing around this concept that we are not just providing insights to a company. We're providing insights that can help keep us afloat as an organization, which has an impact on people's lives and their families. So make it bigger than just data. Make it bigger than just analysis. Give it purpose. And if you can't find purpose in this situation that we're in right now, you probably don't have a whole lot of hope, because this is the kind of thing that brings out the best in people. And so we have been able to keep our morale high because we've stayed busy, which is sort of critical for our brains. And two, we see it as a kind of higher calling.
Transitioning to, you mentioned a blog, and so there's obviously the question about, does maintaining an internal blog run afoul of some privacy concerns or procedures, especially within a larger organization which might have a lot of rules on communications and posting things?
Maybe, I don't know. In this situation, you kind of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And, I am always very, very careful and very hypersensitive to the material that we're putting out there, and make sure that, we don't cross any boundaries, and that we don't, I shouldn't say that we don't ruffle feathers, because sometimes it's important to ruffle feathers and get people to kind of notice what's going on. But certainly not bend the rules or break the rules from a privacy perspective. That's incredibly important to our team. And one advantage that our team has is that we don't really need PII, privately identified and identifiable information. We keep that at arm's length because we're really focused on the patterns in the data. And so, we kind of keep that barrier between ourselves and PII, which helps to keep us out of trouble most of the time.
Well,
that's a great question. I mean, you have to be careful if you're going to do one of these things. You do have to be very, very careful.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned ruffling feathers, because that's a great segue into our last question here. How do you handle conversations, keeping the value of keeping the truth at the center, where the truth gets twisted, or maybe someone senior doesn't want to hear it, is how I interpret this question. Of how do you make sure to maybe then ruffle the feathers in a good way and share information people maybe don't want to hear?
Yeah. Well, it's never about that one conversation that you ruffle their feathers in. It's not about that one insight that you bring to them that they don't want to hear, right? It's about all of the work that you've done up to that point to build a relationship with that person, to build that trust. Actually, I think that was the one of the 5 that I forgot to mention, the build relationships based on mutual trust. And if you do that, when you do bring the insight that is, counter to their beliefs, or doesn't necessarily paint their department in the best light, or is a hard truth, you're better prepared for that conversation, and they're better prepared to hear it. So it's never about one moment in time. It's about a series of moments and conversations that lead up to that moment in time. And as a leader of an analytics organization, it's your responsibility to build those relationships for your team, so that when your analyst does present, they're covered in a way in those relationships.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate you coming out today. And I'll just throw this up on the screen for everyone there. Say thanks to everyone who came and participated today too and listened. Hope you've enjoyed it. I know it's been good to hear all that you have to share on your experience. 2 weeks from now on August 12th, same time frame, we'll have Dr. Pritam Ghosh. He works at VCU Health and he's going to go over modeling for COVID and how it impacts decision making. So it should be another very interesting topic. So I hope to see everyone then. Thanks again to everyone. And again, big thanks to the VCU staff, in particular, Brittany Graysick and Gabby Oliveira for all of their help in making this come off. Really appreciate all your support. So hope everyone has a great Wednesday. And thanks again, Greg.
Thank you.